I'm sitting here in my prayer room at 2:43 a.m., staring at tear-stained pages of notes that contain the most shocking revelation about babies and the rapture that God has ever disclosed to humanity. The silence around me feels heavy with the weight of divine secrets that challenge everything the church has assumed about innocent children and Christ's return. My hands are still trembling from what I witnessed in the spiritual realm just hours ago. Visions so profound and unexpected that they've completely revolutionized my understanding of God's heart for the most vulnerable souls on earth. The lamp on my desk has been burning all night, casting shadows that seem to dance with the urgency of what I'm about to share with you. And honestly, that's exactly how this revelation feels, like dancing shadows of truth that have been hidden in plain sight throughout Scripture, waiting for someone to ask the right question at the right time. Because what God showed me about babies during the rapture isn't just about innocent children. It's about the very nature of His justice, mercy, and the stunning way He's planned to handle the most heart-wrenching aspect of end times events. Wherever you're watching this right now, whether you're a parent who's wondered about your children's eternal security, a believer who's struggled with questions about God's fairness, or someone who's never seriously considered what happens to the most innocent during prophetic events, this message will either confirm what your heart has always hoped about God's character, or completely transform your understanding of His plan for babies and young children in the last days. But here's what I need you to understand before I share what I witnessed. This isn't about theological speculation or emotional wishful thinking. This is about a direct revelation from God Himself about one of the most important and misunderstood aspects of the rapture. And honestly, after seeing what I've seen, I realized that the church's assumptions about babies and the rapture have been tragically incomplete, missing the most beautiful and shocking truth about how God handles innocent souls during the most significant event in human history. It started 8 months ago when I received a message that broke my heart and launched me into the most intense period of seeking God I've ever experienced. Sarah, a young mother from Ohio, wrote to me with desperation that was palpable even through her typed words. "Jonathan," she wrote, "I'm a born-again Christian who believes in the rapture, but I have a 6-month-old baby who obviously can't make a decision for Christ yet. I've heard different teachings about what happens to babies during the rapture. Some say they go, some say they don't. Some say it depends on their parents' faith. I can't sleep at night thinking about being separated from my baby during the most terrifying time in history. What does God really say about innocent children and the rapture? I need to know the truth." You know what hit me about Sarah's message? It wasn't just a theological question. It was the cry of a mother's heart that represented millions of parents around the world who were carrying this same burden of uncertainty about their children's fate during end times events. But Sarah's message was just the beginning. Over the next few weeks, I started receiving similar questions from parents everywhere, and honestly, the pattern that emerged was both heartbreaking and revealing. David wrote, "My wife and I have 3 children under the age of 5. We're believers, but we're terrified about what happens to our kids if the rapture occurs before they're old enough to understand salvation. Some pastors say children automatically go, others say it depends on the parents' faith, and some say we can't know for sure. The uncertainty is destroying our peace about Christ's return." Maria confessed, "I lost my 2-year-old daughter in a car accident last year. I know she's in heaven now, but I keep wondering if she had lived and the rapture happened while she was still a child, would she have been taken? The different teachings I've heard make me question everything about God's character and fairness." Rebecca shared, "I work in a nursery at our church, and I see dozens of babies and toddlers every week. When I think about the rapture, I can't reconcile a loving God allowing innocent children to be left behind to face the tribulation, but I've heard teachers say that's exactly what might happen. I need to know what God really says about this." Michael asked, "I'm a children's pastor, and parents constantly ask me about their kids and the rapture. I've given them the standard answers about the age of accountability and God's mercy, but honestly, I don't feel confident about what I'm telling them. What does Scripture actually reveal about babies and young children during the rapture? I mean, honestly, these messages revealed something that shocked me about the current state of teaching in the church. Here were sincere believers, parents, children's workers, pastors, who were carrying tremendous anxiety about one of the most fundamental questions related to the rapture, and they weren't getting clear, confident answers from church leadership. You know what struck me about every single message? These Christians weren't asking hypothetical theological questions. They were asking about the eternal destiny of specific children they loved. They weren't seeking academic debate, they were seeking peace about God's character and plan for the most innocent souls on earth. And that's when I realized something bigger was happening here. God wasn't just stirring individual hearts with questions about babies and the rapture. He was preparing to reveal truth about this topic that would transform how the church understands his heart for children and his plan for innocent souls during end times events. But what really drove me to my knees in desperate seeking was a conversation I had with a pediatric nurse named Jennifer who worked in a children's hospital. She told me something that haunts me to this day. "Jonathan," she said, "I see dying children every week, and I always comfort their families by assuring them that their babies are going straight to heaven because they're innocent. But then I think about the rapture teachings I've heard and I realize I might be giving false hope. If innocent children don't automatically go to heaven during the rapture, then what does that say about children who die before the age of accountability? The inconsistency in our theology is creating confusion about God's character. You know what Jennifer's observation revealed? There was a fundamental disconnect between what the church taught about children who die and what some taught about children during the rapture. And this disconnect was creating doubt about God's character and confusion about his treatment of innocent souls. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about all these parents carrying anxiety about their children's eternal security, all these church leaders giving uncertain answers to desperate questions, and all these innocent babies whose eternal destiny seemed to be a matter of theological debate rather than clear biblical revelation. But what really broke my heart was imagining the rapture occurring and parents being separated from their children, not because of sin or rebellion, but because of age and the inability to make conscious decisions about salvation. I mean, how could a loving God design an escape plan for his people that left the most innocent and vulnerable behind to face the most terrifying period in human history? It was 6 weeks ago, on a Thursday night, when I finally worked up the courage to ask God directly about babies and the rapture. I had been carrying these questions for months, honestly uncertain about what his answer might reveal about his character and plan. I was here in this very prayer room at midnight, surrounded by the same silence and anticipation, when I fell on my face before God and cried out with desperation I'd never felt before about any theological question. "God," I prayed, "I need to understand the truth about babies and the rapture. Your word seems to give different indicators about innocent children and salvation. Parents around the world are carrying anxiety about their children's eternal security during end times events. Show me what really happens to babies, toddlers, and young children during the rapture. Reveal your heart and your plan for the most innocent souls on earth." You know what happened next? The presence of God filled this room with such overwhelming love and anticipation that I began weeping before he even spoke. But this wasn't just his comforting presence. This was the presence of the one who loves children more than any earthly parent ever could, who has a perfect plan for every innocent soul, and who is about to reveal the most beautiful truth about his character and his treatment of babies during the rapture. "Jonathan," came a voice that carried both infinite tenderness and absolute authority. "You have asked me about babies in the rapture, and I will show you the truth that will transform how my people understand my heart for children and my plan for innocent souls during end times events. But understand, what you are about to learn will challenge conventional teaching while revealing the biblical reality of my character and my treatment of the most vulnerable." I mean, honestly, I thought I was prepared for his answer. But you know what? Nobody is prepared for what God is about to reveal about the most beautiful and shocking aspect of the rapture that involves innocent children. "Look," God commanded, "and I will show you what happens to babies during the rapture, the truth that has been hidden in Scripture but is now being revealed because parents need to understand my heart for their children." Suddenly, it was as if I was transported into the spiritual realm to witness the rapture from heaven's perspective, seeing specifically what happens to babies, toddlers, and young children during this momentous event. I found myself observing the earth during the rapture, but my attention was immediately drawn to something that took my breath away, the special way that God handles innocent children during this event. "The first thing you must understand," God explained, "is that the rapture is not just about removing mature believers from earth, but about demonstrating my perfect character in how I handle every category of human soul, especially the most innocent and vulnerable." I watched as the rapture began to unfold, but instead of seeing only adult believers being caught up, I witnessed something far more comprehensive and beautiful. "Look at what happens to babies during the rapture," God instructed. I saw infants, toddlers, and young children around the world, and what I witnessed next challenged everything I thought I knew about this event. But what I saw wasn't just about babies being taken or left behind, it was about a category of rapture that I had never heard taught in any church or prophecy conference. God was showing me that there are actually multiple categories of people who participate in the rapture, and babies represent one of the most special and protected categories of all. The rapture, God explained, operates according to different principles for different categories of souls. Mature believers are taken based on their faith and relationship with Christ, but innocent children are handled according to entirely different criteria that reflect my perfect justice and mercy. I watched as God revealed that babies and young children don't participate in the rapture the same way that adult believers do, but they participate in something even more beautiful and comprehensive that demonstrates God's special protection for innocent souls. But here's what shocked me most about what I was witnessing. The rapture wasn't just removing people from earth, it was revealing God's character and how He handles every category of human soul, from the most mature believer to the most innocent baby. Look at the categories of rapture participants, God instructed. I saw that the rapture actually involves 5 distinct categories of people, each handled according to different principles that reflect God's perfect wisdom and character. Mature believers, taken based on faith and relationship with Christ. Innocent children, handled according to special mercy principles. Mentally disabled individuals, covered by grace provisions. Unborn babies, protected by divine sovereignty. A special category that I had never heard of before. But what God showed me about that 5th category was so stunning that it will revolutionize how you understand the scope and purpose of the rapture. The 5th category, God explained, consists of individuals who have never had a genuine opportunity to hear and respond to the gospel, and this category reveals my perfect justice in ensuring that no soul is condemned without true opportunity for salvation. I watched as God revealed that the rapture is far more comprehensive than the church has understood, involving not just committed believers but multiple categories of souls who are protected by different aspects of His character and justice. But then God showed me something about babies specifically that was so beautiful and shocking that it made me weep with joy and relief for every parent who has ever worried about their child's eternal security. Look at the special provision I have made for babies during the rapture, God instructed. I watched as every baby, toddler, and young child under a specific age was instantly translated to heaven during the rapture, but not just as passive participants. They were transformed into their eternal bodies and given instant spiritual maturity that allowed them to understand and celebrate what was happening to them. Babies during the rapture, God explained, are not just rescued from tribulation, they are instantly transformed into their eternal state with full spiritual understanding, allowing them to participate consciously in the joy of translation to heaven. I saw infants who had never spoken a word suddenly able to praise God with perfect understanding, toddlers who had barely learned to walk suddenly soaring through the air with supernatural bodies, and young children who had never heard the gospel suddenly possessing complete knowledge of God's love and salvation. But what I witnessed next about the age limit for this special provision was so specific and surprising that it will answer the exact question that every parent has wondered about. The age of automatic rapture inclusion, God revealed, is not arbitrary but is based on the precise point when a child becomes capable of understanding moral responsibility and making conscious decisions about sin and salvation. I watched as God showed me that this age varies slightly for each child based on their individual development, but there is a general age range that applies to most children. And what He revealed about this age will either bring tremendous relief or create urgent concern for parents depending on their children's ages. But here's what was most shocking about what I witnessed. The special provision for babies during the rapture wasn't just about mercy, it was about justice. God was demonstrating that His character requires Him to protect those who are genuinely incapable of moral choice, while holding accountable those who are capable of choosing between right and wrong. Look at why babies receive special treatment during the rapture, God instructed. I watched as God revealed the theological principle that governs His treatment of innocent children during end times events. Babies and young children, God explained, are not taken in the rapture because they are sinless. They are taken because they are incapable of conscious rebellion against me. My justice requires that condemnation only apply to those who are capable of moral choice. I saw that this principle was consistent throughout Scripture and reflected God's perfect character in dealing with souls who have not yet reached the capacity for moral responsibility. But then God showed me something that will shock parents who have children right at the borderline age. Look at what happens to children who are at the threshold of moral accountability, God instructed. I watched as God revealed that children who are right at the age of beginning moral awareness are handled according to a special evaluation that considers their individual spiritual development rather than just their chronological age. Some children, God explained, reach moral accountability earlier than others based on their exposure to truth, their cognitive development, and their spiritual awareness. The Rapture evaluation considers each child individually. I saw that this individual evaluation was perfectly just and merciful, ensuring that no child was held accountable before they were truly capable of moral choice, while also ensuring that children who had reached accountability were evaluated according to their response to available truth. But what God revealed next about children who are left behind was so different from conventional teaching that it will transform how you understand the tribulation period and God's continued mercy even during judgment. Look at what happens to children who are not taken in the rapture, God instructed. I watched as God revealed that children who are left behind because they have reached the age of accountability are not abandoned during the tribulation, but become the focus of special evangelistic efforts and supernatural protection that gives them unprecedented opportunities for salvation. Children left behind during the rapture, God explained, will experience the greatest evangelistic outpouring in history specifically designed to reach young hearts during the tribulation period. I saw that God's plan for the tribulation includes massive salvation of children and young people who missed the rapture but are given extraordinary opportunities to come to faith during the 7-year period. But here's what was most stunning about this revelation. The tribulation period isn't just about judgment, it's about God's final, comprehensive effort to save every possible soul, with special focus on the children and young people who missed the rapture but still have the capacity for salvation. The tribulation evangelism, God revealed, will be specifically designed to reach children and young people with supernatural effectiveness, ensuring that every child who missed the rapture has maximum opportunity for salvation. I watched as God showed me that the 144, 0 witnesses, the 2 witnesses, and the angel with the everlasting gospel would all focus special attention on reaching children and young people during the tribulation period. But then God revealed something about parents and babies during the rapture that was so emotionally powerful that it made me understand why He had kept this truth hidden until now. Look at what happens when believing parents are raptured and their babies are taken with them, God instructed. I watched as families were reunited in heaven during the rapture, with babies instantly transformed into their eternal bodies, but retaining their identity as the beloved children of their earthly parents. Raptured babies, God explained, are not separated from their parents but are reunited with them in heaven in their perfected eternal state, creating family relationships that are more beautiful and complete than anything experienced on earth. I saw parents embracing children who had been transformed into their eternal bodies, with perfect communication, perfect understanding, and perfect love that exceeded anything possible in earthly relationships. But what I witnessed next about babies who die before the rapture was so beautiful that it revealed God's perfect timing and plan for every innocent soul. Look at babies who die before the rapture occurs, God instructed. I watched as God revealed that babies who die before the rapture are not missing out on this event, but are actually participating in it from heaven as they welcome the newly raptured believers and especially the babies who join them. Babies who have already died, God explained, participate in the rapture as greeters and welcomers for the babies and children who are translated during this event, creating a celebration of innocent souls that reflects my special love for children. I saw that heaven during the rapture becomes filled with the joy of children, DAM, both those who had died previously and those who are translated during the event, creating a celebration that reflects God's heart for the most innocent souls. But then God began to reveal something about the purpose behind His special treatment of babies during the rapture that was so profound it changed my entire understanding of this event. The reason I handle babies specially during the rapture, God said, is not just about mercy for innocent souls, but about demonstrating to the universe my perfect character in dealing with every category of human soul according to perfect justice and love. I watched as the rapture became a cosmic demonstration of God's character, showing how He handles mature believers, innocent children, and every category of soul according to principles that reflect His perfect nature. But what God revealed next about the specific age cutoff for automatic rapture inclusion was so precise that it will answer the exact question every parent is asking right now. And honestly, what he showed me about children who are right at that age boundary will either bring tremendous relief or create urgent spiritual concern depending on your family's specific situation. But before I can share that crucial information, I need to show you what God revealed about the 3 different types of babies during the rapture and why understanding these categories is essential for every parent who wants to know their child's eternal destiny. The morning light is beginning to filter through my prayer room window now, and honestly, it feels like I'm watching the dawn of understanding about God's heart for children that has been hidden from the church for centuries. The pages of notes spread across my desk seem to glow with the weight of what God revealed about the 3 distinct categories of babies during the rapture, categories that determine not just whether children are taken, but how they're transformed and what their eternal experience becomes. And that's exactly what God wanted me to understand in this next phase of the revelation, in that not all babies experience the rapture the same way, and the category your child falls into will determine their specific destiny during this momentous event. Now, I will show you the 3 categories of babies during the rapture. God said with tenderness that made every word feel like a divine embrace of parental love. Because, Jonathan, most parents assume all babies are handled identically during this event. But my perfect justice and mercy require different treatment for different situations, and understanding these categories will bring either peace or urgent concern to every parent depending on their specific circumstances. You know what happened next? God began revealing the most detailed and specific information about babies and the rapture that has ever been disclosed, and honestly, what he showed me was both incredibly comforting and surprisingly complex. I mean, this wasn't about simple assumptions that all babies automatically go or all babies are left behind, but about sophisticated categories that reflect God's perfect wisdom in handling different types of innocent souls during the most significant event in history. The first category of babies during the rapture, God explained, consists of infants and young children who are genuinely incapable of moral understanding and conscious choice. These are automatically included in the rapture regardless of their parents' spiritual condition. I watched as God showed me babies around the world who fell into this first category. Look at Category 1 babies during the rapture, God instructed. I saw infants from birth up to approximately 18-24 months old, depending on their individual development, who were instantly translated to heaven during the rapture with no consideration of their parents' faith or spiritual condition. Category 1 babies, God explained, are taken based purely on their innocence and incapacity for moral choice. They represent souls who have never had the ability to choose between right and wrong. I watched as these babies were not just rescued from tribulation, but were instantly transformed into their eternal bodies with full spiritual understanding and the ability to communicate and worship. These babies, God continued, experience immediate spiritual maturation in their eternal bodies, allowing them to understand and participate in the joy of translation while retaining their identity as beloved children. I saw Category 1 babies who had never spoken suddenly praising God with perfect understanding, infants who had barely developed personality suddenly expressing complete joy and awareness of their salvation. But what I witnessed about their reunion with believing parents was so beautiful it made me weep with joy for every family that would experience this. Look at Category 1 babies reuniting with raptured parents, God instructed. I watched as believing parents who were raptured were immediately reunited with their babies, but now both parent and child were in their perfected eternal bodies with enhanced capacity for love and communication. The parent-child relationship in heaven, God explained, exceeds anything possible on earth because both souls are perfected and can experience love without the limitations of earthly bodies and minds. I saw families embracing with supernatural joy, babies communicating with their parents through perfect spiritual connection and love that was deeper and more complete than anything experienced during earthly life. But then God showed me what happens to Category 1 babies whose parents are not raptured. Look at Category 1 babies whose parents are left behind, God instructed. I watched as these babies were still taken in the rapture but were received in heaven by a special category of caretakers that God has prepared specifically for this situation. Category 1 babies with unbelieving parents, God explained, are received in heaven by perfected saints who become their eternal family, ensuring that no innocent child experiences abandonment or loss. I saw that these babies were not orphaned in heaven, but were immediately embraced by loving caretakers who had been specifically prepared to welcome and nurture children whose earthly parents missed the rapture. These caretakers, God continued, include believers who died childless on earth and are given the joy of caring for raptured babies, creating families in heaven that reflect my perfect love for children. I watched as childless couples who had died in faith were reunited with babies whose parents had been left behind, creating eternal families that were more beautiful and complete than anything possible on earth. But what God revealed about the age range for Category 1 was so specific that it will answer the exact question every parent of a toddler is asking. The upper age limit for Category 1, God revealed, varies between 18 and 30 months, depending on the individual child's cognitive and spiritual development, with most children transitioning to Category 2 around their second birthday. I watched as God showed me that this age range was not arbitrary but was based on the precise point when children begin to understand basic concepts of right and wrong and become capable of simple moral choices. Some children, God explained, remain in Category 1 longer due to developmental delays or limited exposure to moral concepts, while others transition to Category 2 earlier due to advanced development or extensive moral instruction. I saw that God's evaluation of each child was perfectly individual and just, considering their specific capacity for moral understanding rather than applying a rigid chronological standard. But then God revealed the second category, and what he showed me was so different from the first that it will create urgent concern for parents of children in this age range. The second category of babies during the rapture, God said, consists of children who have begun to develop moral awareness and the capacity for simple choices between right and wrong. These children are evaluated individually based on their response to available moral light. I watched as God showed me children who fell into this second category. Look at Category 2 children during the rapture, God instructed. I saw children approximately 2 to 7 years old who had begun to understand basic concepts of obedience, kindness, sharing, and simple moral choices, and their rapture inclusion was determined by their response to the moral light they had received. Category 2 children, God explained, are not automatically included or excluded from the rapture, but are evaluated based on their heart response to the moral understanding they have developed. I watched as some Category 2 children were taken in the rapture because their hearts had responded positively to moral instruction and they had demonstrated love for God and others within their capacity. But I also saw Category 2 children who were left behind because they had consistently chosen selfishness, rebellion, and rejection of moral instruction despite their young age. Category 2 evaluation, God continued, considers the child's heart attitude toward authority, their response to moral instruction, and their demonstration of love or selfishness within their developmental capacity. I saw that this evaluation was perfectly just because it only held children accountable for moral choices they were actually capable of making and understanding. But what shocked me most about Category 2 was how the evaluation process worked. Look at how Category 2 children are evaluated, God instructed. I watched as God revealed that Category 2 children are not evaluated based on adult standards of salvation, but based on their heart response to age-appropriate moral light and their demonstration of love within their limited capacity. A Category 2 child, God explained, who consistently chooses kindness over cruelty, obedience over rebellion, and love over selfishness within their capacity, demonstrates a heart that is responsive to my spirit. I saw children as young as 3 or 4 whose hearts had genuinely responded to God's love through their parents' instruction, their exposure to Bible stories, and their natural spiritual sensitivity. These children, God continued, may not understand adult concepts of salvation, but their hearts have responded to the light they have received, making them ready for rapture inclusion. I watched as Category 2 children who were taken experienced the same instant transformation and spiritual maturation as Category 1 babies, but they retained memory of their earthly response to God's love. But then I saw Category 2 children who were left behind, and what God revealed about their situation was both sobering and hopeful. Look at Category 2 children who are left behind, God instructed. I watched as children who had consistently chosen rebellion and selfishness despite moral instruction were not taken in the rapture, but they were immediately targeted by the most intensive evangelistic efforts during the tribulation. Category 2 children left behind, God explained, become the primary focus of tribulation evangelism because their hearts are still tender and capable of dramatic transformation during this period. I saw that these children, despite being left behind, had unprecedented opportunities for salvation during the tribulation through supernatural evangelistic efforts specifically designed for young hearts. But what God revealed about the parents' role in Category 2 evaluation was so important that it will transform how Christian parents approach moral instruction with their young children. The parents' faithfulness in providing moral instruction, God revealed, directly impacts the Category 2 child's opportunity to respond to available light and qualify for rapture inclusion. I watched as God showed me that Christian parents who faithfully taught their children about God's love, moral choices, and spiritual truth were giving their Category 2 children the maximum opportunity to respond positively and qualify for the rapture. Faithful parental instruction, God explained, provides Category 2 children with the moral light necessary for their hearts to respond and demonstrate readiness for rapture inclusion. I saw parents who had consistently taught their young children about Jesus, prayer, kindness, and moral choices, and their children's hearts had responded with genuine love for God within their capacity. But I also saw parents who had neglected spiritual instruction, and their Category 2 children lacked the moral light necessary to demonstrate heart response and qualify for rapture inclusion. Parental faithfulness in spiritual instruction, God continued, is not just about earthly character development, but about providing children with the opportunity to respond to moral light and qualify for rapture inclusion. But then God revealed the third category, and what he showed me was so unexpected that it will shock parents who assumed their older children were automatically safe or automatically lost. The third category during the rapture, God said, consists of children and young people who have reached full moral accountability and must be evaluated according to the same salvation criteria as adults, but with special consideration for their limited exposure to gospel truth. I watched as God showed me children who fell into this third category. Look at Category 3 children during the rapture, God instructed. I saw children approximately 7-12 years old who had reached full capacity for moral understanding and conscious choice about salvation, and their rapture inclusion was determined by their personal relationship with Christ. Category 3 children, God explained, are evaluated according to adult salvation criteria because they have reached the capacity for conscious faith decisions and personal relationship with me. I watched as some Category 3 children were taken in the rapture because they had made genuine personal decisions to follow Christ and had developed real relationships with Him despite their young age. But I also saw Category 3 children who were left behind because they had not made personal commitments to Christ or had rejected the gospel truth they had received. Category 3 evaluation, God continued, considers whether the child has moved beyond moral response to actual faith response and personal relationship with Christ. I saw that this evaluation required evidence of personal prayer life, individual spiritual choices, and genuine relationship with Christ rather than just moral behavior or parental faith. But what was most surprising about Category 3 was how many children in Christian families fell into this category without their parents realizing it. Look at Category 3 children in Christian families, God instructed. I watched as God revealed that many children in Christian homes had reached Category 3 status, to full moral accountability, but their parents assumed they were still in Category 2 and automatically safe. Many Christian parents, God explained, underestimate their children's spiritual capacity and fail to help them transition from moral response to personal faith response. I saw children who were capable of personal salvation decisions, but whose parents had not guided them into individual relationships with Christ, assuming their family faith was sufficient. Category 3 children, God continued, need personal salvation experiences, not just family spiritual environments, to qualify for rapture inclusion. I watched as some Category 3 children in Christian families were left behind because they had never made personal commitments to Christ despite growing up in believing homes. But then God revealed the most shocking truth about the age boundaries between categories. The transition between categories, God said, is not determined by chronological age alone, but by individual, spiritual, and cognitive development, meaning some children reach Category 3 as early as age 5, while others remain in Category 2 until age 8 or 9. I watched as God showed me that the category boundaries were fluid and individual, requiring parents to discern their children's spiritual capacity rather than assuming based on age. Some children, God explained, demonstrate Category 3 capacity very early due to advanced spiritual sensitivity and cognitive development, while others develop more slowly and remain in earlier categories longer. I saw that this individual variation meant parents needed to evaluate their children's spiritual condition based on capacity rather than age, ensuring they provided appropriate guidance for their child's actual developmental level. But what God revealed next about how parents can determine their child's category was so practical and urgent that it will transform how you assess your own children's spiritual condition. Look at the indicators that reveal a child's rapture category, God instructed. I watched as God revealed specific signs that parents could observe to determine whether their child was in Category 1, 2, or 3. Category 1 indicators, God explained, include inability to understand moral concepts, lack of capacity for conscious choice, and dependence on others for all moral guidance. I saw that Category 1 children could not yet understand concepts like sharing, obedience, or kindness as moral choices, but simply responded to immediate instruction without comprehension. Category 2 indicators, God continued, include beginning moral understanding, capacity for simple choices between right and wrong, and ability to demonstrate love or selfishness through conscious decisions. I watched as Category 2 children could understand basic moral concepts, make simple choices about behavior, and demonstrate hard attitudes through their responses to instruction and situations. Category 3 indicators, God explained, include full moral understanding, capacity for abstract spiritual concepts, and ability to make personal faith decisions independent of parental guidance. I saw that Category 3 children could understand concepts like sin, salvation, personal relationship with God, and could make individual spiritual choices that reflected genuine faith rather than just moral compliance. But then God revealed something about the timing of category transitions that was so important it could determine a child's eternal destiny. The transition from Category 2 to Category 3, God said, often occurs rapidly and can be missed by parents who are not carefully observing their child's spiritual development. I watched as children moved from Category 2 to Category 3, sometimes within a matter of months, and parents who missed this transition failed to provide the personal salvation guidance their children needed. Parents must be vigilant, God explained, to recognize when their children have developed Category 3 capacity and need personal salvation experiences rather than continued Category 2 moral instruction. I saw families where parents continued treating Category 3 children as if they were still in Category 2, missing crucial opportunities to guide them into personal relationships with Christ. But what God revealed about children who are right at the category boundaries was so specific that it will create urgent concern for parents whose children are in transition periods. Children who are transitioning between categories, God revealed, are evaluated based on their highest demonstrated capacity, meaning a child showing any Category 3 indicators will be evaluated according to Category 3 criteria. I watched as children who had demonstrated any capacity for personal spiritual understanding were held accountable for personal faith decisions even if they still showed some Category 2 characteristics. The evaluation errs on the side of accountability, God explained, because my justice requires that souls who are capable of conscious choice be evaluated according to their capacity rather than given automatic mercy they no longer need. I saw that this principle ensured perfect justice while protecting truly innocent souls, but it also meant that parents needed to be very aware of their children's developing spiritual capacity. But then God began to reveal something about the specific age ranges and evaluation criteria that was so detailed it will help every parent determine exactly where their children stand right now. Look at the detailed breakdown of category criteria, God instructed. I watched as God revealed the specific developmental markers that determine category placement and evaluation criteria. But what he showed me about children who are right at the borderline ages was so crucial that it will determine whether thousands of children are ready for the rapture or desperately need immediate spiritual attention. And honestly, what God revealed about the evaluation process for borderline children will either confirm that your children are safely prepared or reveal that you have urgent spiritual work to do with them before it's too late. But before I can share those specific age ranges and evaluation criteria, I need to show you what God revealed about the most shocking category of all, a fourth category that involves children who have been exposed to specific spiritual truth and are held to an even higher standard of accountability. I'm still here in my prayer room as the sun climbs higher, and honestly, the weight of what God is revealing about children and the rapture keeps intensifying with each new layer of truth. The notes scattered across my desk now contain information about a fourth category of children that I never could have imagined. A category so specific and sobering that it will shock parents who thought they understood their word. Children's spiritual standing. And that's exactly what God wanted me to grasp in this next phase of the revelation, that there's a hidden category of children whose rapture destiny is determined by their response to specific spiritual privileges that most parents don't even realize their children have received. Now I will reveal the fourth category that has been hidden from the church's understanding, God said with solemnity that made the spiritual atmosphere feel heavy with eternal significance. Because, Jonathan, there are children who have received extraordinary spiritual light and opportunity, and their evaluation during the rapture operates according to entirely different criteria that reflect their privileged exposure to divine truth. You know what happened next? God began unveiling the most unexpected and challenging aspect of children in the rapture, a category that involves children who have been given special spiritual advantages and are therefore held to higher standards of categorying how accountability. I mean, this wasn't about innocent babies or children with limited exposure to truth, but about children who have received extraordinary spiritual privileges and whose eternal destiny depends on how they've responded to these unique opportunities. The fourth category during the rapture, God explained, consists of children who have been raised in spiritually privileged environments with extraordinary exposure to divine truth. These children are evaluated according to heightened accountability that reflects their exceptional spiritual advantages. I watched as God showed me children around the world who fell into this fourth category. Look at category 4 children during the rapture, God instructed. I saw children who had been raised in pastors' homes, missionary families, prophetic ministries, and other spiritually intense environments where they had received far more spiritual input than typical children their age. Category 4 children, God explained, have been exposed to levels of spiritual truth, prophetic revelation, and divine encounters that create heightened accountability for their response to available light. I watched as these children were evaluated not just based on their age-appropriate spiritual capacity, but based on the extraordinary spiritual privileges they had received through their family environments. These children, God continued, have heard detailed prophetic teaching, witnessed supernatural manifestations, received personal prophetic words, and been exposed to spiritual realities that most adults never experience. I saw children as young as 6 or 7 who had been present during prophetic revelations, had witnessed miraculous healings, had received personal words from God through their parents, and had been taught advanced spiritual concepts far beyond their chronological age. But what shocked me most about Category 4 was how their evaluation criteria differed from other children. Look at how Category 4 children are evaluated, God instructed. I watched as God revealed that Category 4 children were held accountable not just for basic moral choices or simple faith decisions, but for their response to the specific spiritual privileges they had received. A Category 4 child, God explained, who has been present during prophetic revelations but has hardened their heart against spiritual truth demonstrates a level of rebellion that exceeds normal childhood resistance. I saw children who had been exposed to extraordinary spiritual realities but had chosen to reject, mock, or rebel against the truth they had witnessed, despite their young age. These children, God continued, cannot claim ignorance or limited exposure because they have received spiritual advantages that most adults never experience. I watched as Category 4 children were evaluated based on their response to specific spiritual encounters, prophetic words, supernatural manifestations, and advanced biblical teaching they had received through their privileged environments. But what was most sobering about Category 4 was how many children in ministry families fell into this category without their parents realizing the heightened accountability it created. Look at Category 4 children in ministry families, God instructed. I watched as God revealed that children of pastors, prophets, evangelists, and other ministry leaders were automatically placed in Category 4 due to their extraordinary exposure to spiritual truth and supernatural realities. Ministry children, God explained, have been present during divine encounters, have overheard prophetic conversations, have witnessed supernatural manifestations, and have been taught spiritual concepts that create adult-level accountability despite their young age. I saw pastors' kids who had been present during powerful prayer meetings, prophets' children who had overheard detailed revelations about end-times events, evangelists' kids who had witnessed miraculous healings, and missionary children who had been exposed to spiritual warfare and supernatural protection. These children, God continued, cannot be evaluated according to normal childhood criteria because their spiritual exposure has been extraordinary and their opportunity to respond has been unprecedented. I watched as Category 4 children were held accountable for their response to specific spiritual privileges that had been granted through their family's ministry calling. But then God revealed something about Category 4 evaluation that was so specific it will shock ministry parents who assumed their children were automatically safe because of their spiritual environment. Category 4 children who rebel against their spiritual privileges, God said, demonstrate a level of heart hardness that disqualifies them from rapture inclusion despite their young age and ministry family background. I watched as some Category 4 children were left behind during the rapture because they had consistently rejected the extraordinary spiritual truth they had been exposed to through their privileged environments. A pastor's child who mocks prophetic revelation, God explained, demonstrates greater rebellion than an unchurched child who has never heard the gospel, because the pastor's child is rejecting light they have clearly received. I saw ministry children who had been present during powerful spiritual encounters but had chosen to harden their hearts, mock spiritual realities, and rebel against the truth they had witnessed. These children, God continued, are evaluated according to their response to extraordinary privilege rather than their chronological age or family spiritual standing. I watched as Category 4 children who had rejected their spiritual privileges were held to adult standards of accountability, despite being only 8, 9, or 10 years old. But what God revealed about the specific spiritual privileges that create Category 4 status was so detailed that it will help ministry parents understand exactly what level of accountability their children are facing. Look at the spiritual privileges that create Category 4 accountability, God instructed. I watched as God revealed the specific types of spiritual exposure that move children into heightened accountability status. Personal prophetic words received by the child, God explained, create Category 4 accountability because the child has received direct divine communication that requires a response. I saw children who had received personal prophetic words about their calling, destiny, or spiritual condition, and their response to these direct divine communications determined their rapture eligibility. Presence during supernatural manifestations, God continued, creates Category 4 accountability because the child has witnessed undeniable evidence of divine reality. I watched as children who had been present during miraculous healings, supernatural visitations, or powerful spiritual encounters were held accountable for their response to these extraordinary experiences. Exposure to detailed prophetic teaching, God explained, creates Category 4 accountability because the child has received advanced spiritual knowledge that most adults never access. I saw children who had been taught about end times events, prophetic timelines, spiritual warfare, and other advanced topics that created adult-level understanding and accountability. Participation in intensive spiritual environments, God continued, creates Category 4 accountability because the child has been immersed in spiritual realities that exceed normal childhood exposure. I watched as children who had participated in extended prayer meetings, prophetic conferences, healing services, and other intensive spiritual activities were evaluated based on their response to these extraordinary opportunities. But then God revealed the most shocking aspect of Category 4, Everpoint 1, how early children could be placed in this category. Category 4 accountability, God said, can begin as early as age 4 or 5 for children who have received extraordinary spiritual privileges, regardless of their apparent spiritual maturity. I watched as very young children who had been exposed to powerful spiritual realities were held accountable for their heart response to these experiences, even if they seemed too young for such responsibility. A 5-year-old who has received a personal prophetic word, God explained, is accountable for their response to that divine communication because they have been granted a privilege that creates responsibility. I saw very young children who had been given direct words from God through prophetic ministry and were evaluated based on whether their hearts had received or rejected these divine communications. Age becomes irrelevant, God continued. When a child has received direct divine communication or witnessed undeniable supernatural manifestations, I watched as Category 4 children were evaluated based on their spiritual privileges rather than their chronological development, creating accountability that shocked their parents who had assumed their young age provided automatic protection. But what God revealed about the heart attitudes that determine Category 4 evaluation was so specific that it will help ministry parents assess their children's spiritual condition right now. Look at the heart attitudes that determine Category 4 outcomes, God instructed. I watched as God revealed the specific responses that qualified or disqualified Category 4 children for rapture inclusion. Reverence for spiritual realities, God explained, demonstrates a heart that is responsive to divine privilege and qualifies the child for rapture inclusion. I saw Category 4 children who had witnessed supernatural manifestations and responded with awe, worship, and increased hunger for God, demonstrating hearts that were receptive to divine truth. Hunger for more spiritual truth, God continued, demonstrates a heart that values divine privilege and seeks deeper relationship with me. I watched as Category 4 children who had been exposed to prophetic revelation and responded by asking questions, seeking prayer, and desiring more spiritual understanding, showing hearts that treasured their spiritual advantages. Obedience to spiritual instruction, God explained, demonstrates a heart that honors divine privilege and submits to spiritual authority. I saw Category 4 children who had received prophetic words or spiritual instruction and responded with immediate obedience and lifestyle changes, proving their hearts were responsive to divine communication. But then I saw the heart attitudes that disqualified Category 4 children from rapture inclusion. Mockery of spiritual realities, God said, demonstrates a heart that despises divine privilege and rejects available truth. I watched as Category 4 children who had witnessed supernatural manifestations but responded with jokes, skepticism, and ridicule, showing hearts that were hardened against divine truth. Rebellion against spiritual instruction, God continued, demonstrates a heart that rejects divine privilege and refuses spiritual authority. I saw Category 4 children who had received prophetic words or spiritual guidance but responded with defiance, disobedience, and rejection of divine communication. Indifference to spiritual opportunities, God explained, demonstrates a heart that takes divine privilege for granted and fails to value extraordinary spiritual access. I watched as Category 4 children who had been exposed to powerful spiritual environments but responded with boredom, distraction, and lack of interest, revealing hearts that despised their spiritual advantages. But what God revealed about the parents' responsibility for Category 4 children was so sobering that it will transform how ministry families approach their children's spiritual development. Parents who expose their children to extraordinary spiritual realities, God said, bear responsibility for ensuring their children understand the accountability that comes with spiritual privilege. I watched as God revealed that ministry parents who brought their children into powerful spiritual environments without preparing them for the responsibility this created were failing in their parental duty. A parent who allows their child to receive prophetic words, God explained, must ensure the child understands they are now accountable for their response to direct divine communication. I saw ministry parents who had exposed their children to supernatural encounters without explaining the heightened accountability this created, leaving their children unprepared for Category 4 evaluation. Ministry parents, God continued, must balance their children's exposure to spiritual realities with age-appropriate instruction about the responsibility that comes with spiritual privilege. I watched as some ministry families had successfully prepared their children for Category 4 accountability by teaching them to reverence spiritual encounters and respond appropriately to divine communication. But I also saw ministry families where children had been exposed to extraordinary spiritual realities without proper preparation, creating Category 4 accountability without Category 4 understanding. The privilege of spiritual exposure, God explained, must be accompanied by instruction about spiritual responsibility, or the privilege becomes a source of condemnation rather than blessing. But then God revealed something about Category 4 children that was both terrifying and hopeful. Category 4 children who are left behind during the rapture, God said, face the most intense spiritual warfare during the tribulation because the enemy recognizes their extraordinary spiritual potential. I watched as Category 4 children who missed the rapture became primary targets of demonic attack during the tribulation period because of their previous exposure to divine truth. These children, God explained, have demonstrated capacity for extraordinary spiritual encounters, making them either powerful assets for the kingdom or dangerous weapons for the enemy during the tribulation. I saw Category 4 children who had been left behind, experiencing supernatural attacks designed to turn their spiritual sensitivity toward darkness rather than light. But I also saw Category 4 children who had been left behind becoming some of the most powerful witnesses during the tribulation because their previous spiritual exposure had prepared them for supernatural ministry. Category 4, children who repent during the tribulation, God continued, often become the most effective evangelists because they understand both the reality of divine truth and the consequences of rejecting spiritual privilege. I watched as some Category 4 children who had initially rejected their spiritual advantages experienced dramatic conversions during the tribulation and became powerful witnesses to other young people. But then God began to reveal something that was so shocking it challenged everything I thought I understood about children in Christian families. Look at the distribution of categories among children in Christian families, God instructed. I watched as God revealed the actual breakdown of categories among children being raised in Christian homes, and what I saw was both surprising and alarming. In typical Christian families, God explained, Category 1 includes children under 2, Category 2 includes children 2-6, Category 3 includes children 7-11, and Category 4 includes children who have received extraordinary spiritual privileges regardless of age. I saw that most Christian families had children distributed across multiple categories, with different evaluation criteria applying to each child based on their individual development and spiritual exposure. But what shocked me was the percentage of children in Christian families who were actually in Category 4 due to their exposure to prophetic teaching, supernatural encounters, or intensive spiritual environments. Approximately 40% of children in prophetically aware Christian families, God revealed, qualify for Category 4 status due to their exposure to end-times teaching, prophetic revelation, and supernatural spiritual environments. I watched as God showed me that many more children than expected were being evaluated according to heightened accountability criteria because of their parents' involvement in prophetic ministry, supernatural churches, or intensive spiritual activities. These children, God explained, have been present during prophetic conferences, have heard detailed end-times teaching, have been exposed to supernatural manifestations, and have received spiritual input that creates adult-level accountability. I saw children as young as 6 or 7 who were being evaluated according to Category 4 criteria because they had been exposed to prophetic revelation about the rapture, tribulation, and end-times events through their parents' spiritual involvement. But what God revealed about the timing implications was so urgent that it will create immediate concern for parents who realize their children are in Category 4. Category 4 children, God said, must be spiritually prepared immediately because their heightened accountability means they cannot rely on gradual spiritual development or future opportunities for salvation. I watched as God revealed that Category 4 children needed immediate spiritual attention because their extraordinary privileges created immediate accountability that could not be postponed. A Category 4 child who dies or faces the rapture, God explained, will be evaluated based on their current response to their spiritual privileges, not their potential future development. I saw that Category 4 children could not assume they had time for gradual spiritual growth because their heightened accountability required immediate heart response to the privileges they had already received. But then God began to reveal the most practical and urgent information about how parents could determine their children's categories and ensure they were properly prepared. Look at the assessment process that parents must use to determine their children's categories, God instructed. I watched as God revealed specific steps that parents could take to evaluate their children's spiritual standing and ensure appropriate preparation for each category. But what He showed me about the assessment criteria was so detailed and specific that it will help every parent determine exactly where their children stand and what spiritual preparation they need right now. And honestly, what God revealed about children who are transitioning between categories will either confirm that your children are properly prepared or reveal that you have urgent spiritual work to do before the rapture occurs. But before I can share those specific assessment criteria and preparation steps, I need to show you what God revealed about the most shocking discovery of all, the actual percentage of children in Christian families who are currently unprepared for the rapture, and what parents must do immediately to ensure their children's readiness. The afternoon light is streaming through my prayer room window now, and honestly, I'm still reeling from what God revealed about the actual statistics of children's rapture readiness in Christian families. The pages of notes before me contain numbers so shocking that they will devastate parents who assumed their children were automatically safe because of their Christian home environment. And that's exactly what God wanted me to understand in this crucial phase of the revelation, NACN, that the reality of children's spiritual condition in Christian families is drastically different from what parents believe, and the rapture will expose a level of unpreparedness that will shock the church. Now I will show you the statistics that will stun Christian parents. God said with gravity that made every word feel like a divine warning about the spiritual condition of children in believing families. Because, Jonathan, most Christian parents have dangerous assumptions about their children's rapture readiness, and the actual numbers will reveal a crisis of spiritual preparation that demands immediate attention. You know what happened next? God began unveiling statistical information about children's spiritual condition that was so alarming it made me understand why he had kept this revelation hidden until now. I mean, these weren't encouraging statistics about the faithfulness of Christian families, but sobering data about the actual spiritual state of children being raised in Christian homes and their readiness for the rapture. Look at the rapture readiness statistics for children in Christian families, God instructed. I watched as God revealed data that challenged every assumption I had about children in believing homes. Among children and families that attend church regularly, God explained, only 23% are actually prepared for rapture inclusion based on their current spiritual condition and category evaluation. I saw statistics that showed the vast majority of children in Christian families were not ready for the rapture despite their parents' assumptions about their spiritual safety. This means, God continued, that 77% of children in regular church-attending families would be left behind if the rapture occurred today, shocking their parents who assumed their family's faith provided automatic protection. I watched as God showed me the breakdown of why so many children in Christian families were unprepared for the rapture. Among Category 2 children in Christian families, God revealed, 68% have not demonstrated the heart response to moral light that qualifies them for rapture inclusion. I saw that most young children in Christian homes had been exposed to moral instruction but had not developed the genuine heart response that Category 2 evaluation required. These children, God explained, have learned to comply with external expectations, but have not developed internal heart attitudes of love, kindness, and responsiveness to spiritual truth. I watched as children in Christian families demonstrated outward obedience while maintaining hearts that were selfish, rebellious, and unresponsive to spiritual reality. Among Category 3 children in Christian families, God continued, 84% have not made the personal faith decisions necessary for rapture inclusion. I saw that the vast majority of school-age children in Christian homes had not transitioned from family faith to personal relationship with Christ, despite their parents' assumptions about their spiritual condition. These children, God explained, are relying on their parents' faith rather than developing personal relationships with me, making them unprepared for individual evaluation during the rapture. I watched as children who had grown up in Christian environments had never made personal commitments to Christ, assuming their family's spiritual atmosphere was sufficient for their eternal security. But what was most shocking was the statistics about Category 4 children. Among Category 4 children in ministry families, God revealed, 91% are currently unprepared for rapture inclusion due to their response to extraordinary spiritual privileges. I saw that almost all children who had been exposed to extraordinary spiritual realities had failed to respond appropriately to their heightened privileges, creating dangerous spiritual conditions despite their advantaged environments. These children, God explained, have been exposed to supernatural encounters, prophetic revelations, and intensive spiritual environments, but have responded with indifference, mockery, or rebellion rather than reverence and hunger. I watched as ministry children who had witnessed miraculous healings, heard prophetic words, and been present during powerful spiritual encounters had hardened their hearts against the very privileges that should have drawn them closer to God. But then God revealed statistics about specific age groups that were even more alarming. Look at the rapture readiness by age group, God instructed. I watched as God broke down the statistics by specific age ranges, revealing patterns that would shock parents of children in different developmental stages. Among children ages 2-4 in Christian families, God revealed, 43% are not demonstrating the heart responses necessary for Category 2 qualification. I saw that nearly half of toddlers in Christian homes were showing patterns of selfishness, rebellion, and unresponsiveness to moral instruction that indicated hearts that were not ready for rapture inclusion. These children, God explained, have been exposed to moral instruction, but are consistently choosing selfishness over kindness, rebellion over obedience, and cruelty over compassion. I watched as very young children in Christian families were demonstrating hard attitudes that disqualified them from rapture inclusion despite their tender age in Christian environment. Among children ages 5-7 in Christian families, God continued, 72% are not prepared for rapture inclusion due to failure to transition appropriately between categories or respond to their level of accountability. I saw that most early elementary-age children in Christian homes were either failing Category 2 evaluation or had transitioned to Category 3 without making necessary personal faith decisions. These children, God explained, are old enough to understand personal spiritual choices, but have not been guided into individual relationships with me by parents who assume family faith is sufficient. I watched as children who were capable of personal salvation decisions were being left unprepared by parents who didn't recognize their children's spiritual capacity and need for individual faith experiences. Among children ages 8-12 in Christian families, God revealed, 89% are not prepared for rapture inclusion due to lack of personal salvation experiences, despite full spiritual accountability. I saw that the vast majority of older children in Christian homes had reached full spiritual accountability but had never made personal commitments to Christ, relying instead on their family's spiritual environment. These children, God explained, are being evaluated according to adult salvation criteria, but have never experienced personal conversion, making them unprepared despite their Christian family background. I watched as preteen children in Christian families were facing adult-level spiritual evaluation without having adult-level spiritual experiences, creating dangerous gaps in their rapture readiness. But what God revealed about the reasons behind these shocking statistics was even more disturbing. Look at why children in Christian families are so unprepared, God instructed. I watched as God revealed the specific factors that were creating such widespread unpreparedness among children in believing homes. Parental assumptions about automatic spiritual protection, God explained, prevent parents from recognizing their children's actual spiritual condition and need for individual preparation. I saw Christian parents who assumed their family's faith, church attendance, and Christian environment automatically protected their children, leading them to neglect individual spiritual assessment and preparation. These parents, God continued, believe their children are safe because of external Christian factors, rather than evaluating their children's actual heart condition and personal spiritual development. I watched as well-meaning Christian parents were failing to prepare their children for rapture evaluation because they had false assumptions about what qualified children for inclusion. Lack of age-appropriate spiritual instruction, God revealed, leaves children without the tools necessary to respond appropriately to their level of spiritual accountability. I saw Christian families where children were receiving general moral instruction but not specific spiritual guidance appropriate to their developmental stage and accountability level. Children in Category 2, God explained, need instruction about heart attitudes and spiritual responsiveness, while children in Category 3 need guidance into personal salvation experiences. I watched as parents were giving the same general spiritual instruction to all their children regardless of their individual spiritual capacity and accountability level, leaving many children unprepared for their specific evaluation criteria. Failure to recognize category transitions, God continued, results in children being held accountable for spiritual capacity their parents haven't recognized or addressed. I saw parents who missed when their children transitioned from Category 2 to Category 3, continuing to treat them as if moral instruction was sufficient when they actually needed personal salvation experiences. These parents, God explained, continue providing Category 2 instruction to children who have developed Category 3 accountability, leaving them unprepared for individual spiritual evaluation. I watched as children who had developed capacity for personal faith decisions were not receiving appropriate guidance because their parents hadn't recognized their spiritual development. But what was most alarming was what God revealed about Category 4 children in ministry families. Ministry parents, God said, often expose their children to extraordinary spiritual realities without preparing them for the heightened accountability this creates. I watched as pastors, prophets, and other ministry leaders brought their children into powerful spiritual environments without explaining the responsibility that came with such privileges. These parents, God explained, assume their children will automatically benefit from spiritual exposure without recognizing that privilege creates accountability that requires specific preparation. I saw ministry children who had been present during prophetic conferences, healing services, and supernatural encounters but had never been taught how to respond appropriately to such extraordinary privileges. The result, God continued, is children who have received extraordinary spiritual advantages but have responded with indifference or rebellion because they weren't prepared for the responsibility that comes with spiritual privilege. I watched as Category 4 children in ministry families were being disqualified from Rapture inclusion because they had been given privileges without preparation, creating accountability without understanding. But then God revealed something about the timing implications that was so urgent it made me understand why this revelation was being given now. These statistics represent the current spiritual condition of children in Christian families, God said, but the rapture could occur at any moment, making immediate spiritual preparation essential for every unprepared child. I watched as God revealed that there was no guarantee of time for gradual spiritual development or future opportunities for preparation. Parents who assume they have time to address their children's spiritual condition gradually, God explained, may find themselves separated from unprepared children if the rapture occurs before proper spiritual preparation is completed. I saw families where parents had recognized their children's spiritual needs but had postponed intensive preparation, assuming they had time for gradual development. The rapture, God continued, will occur based on my timing, not based on families' readiness or preparation schedules, making immediate action essential for every unprepared child. I watched as the urgency of proper spiritual preparation became clear. The need, children who were not ready now might not have opportunity to become ready before the rapture occurred. But what God revealed about the geographic and denominational breakdown of these statistics was equally shocking. Look at the rapture readiness statistics by geographic region and denominational background, God instructed. I watched as God revealed that the problem of unprepared children in Christian families was universal, crossing all denominational and geographic boundaries. Among children in evangelical families, God revealed, 76% are not prepared for rapture inclusion, despite their families' doctrinal beliefs about salvation and end times events. I saw that even families with strong biblical beliefs about salvation were failing to properly prepare their children for individual spiritual evaluation. Among children in Pentecostal and charismatic families, God continued, 82% are not prepared for rapture inclusion despite their exposure to supernatural spiritual environments. I watched as families that emphasized spiritual gifts and supernatural encounters were actually producing higher rates of unprepared children because they assumed spiritual exposure automatically created spiritual preparation. Among children in traditional denominational families, God revealed, 85% are not prepared for rapture inclusion due to emphasis on religious tradition rather than personal spiritual experience. I saw that families in traditional churches were focusing on religious education and moral instruction without ensuring their children had personal relationships with Christ. But what was most surprising was the statistics about homeschooling families in Christian schools. Among children in homeschooling families with Christian curricula, God revealed 71% are not prepared for rapture inclusion despite intensive Christian education. I saw that even families who had made significant sacrifices to provide Christian education for their children were not necessarily producing rapture-ready children. Christian education, God explained, provides knowledge about spiritual truth but does not automatically create personal spiritual experience or heart transformation. I watched as children who could recite Bible verses, explain theological concepts, and demonstrate biblical knowledge had never experienced personal conversion or developed genuine relationships with Christ. Among children in Christian schools, God continued, 79% are not prepared for rapture inclusion despite daily exposure to Christian instruction and environment. I saw that Christian educational environments were producing children with extensive biblical knowledge but limited personal spiritual experience, leaving them unprepared for individual evaluation during the rapture. But then God revealed the most shocking statistic of all. Among children of pastors, evangelists, and other full-time ministry leaders, God said, 94% are not prepared for rapture inclusion due to their response to extraordinary spiritual privileges and heightened accountability. I watched as God revealed that ministry families had the highest rates of unprepared children because their children's exposure to extraordinary spiritual realities created Category 4 accountability that most had failed to meet. Ministry children, God explained, have been exposed to levels of spiritual truth and supernatural encounters that create adult-level accountability, regardless of their age, and most have responded inappropriately to these privileges. I saw pastors' kids who had been present during powerful prayer meetings but had developed cynical attitudes towards spiritual reality, prophets' children who had heard detailed revelations but had become indifferent to supernatural truth, and evangelist kids who had witnessed miraculous healings but had hardened their hearts against divine encounters. These children, God continued, cannot claim ignorance or limited exposure because they have received spiritual advantages that most adults never experience, making their rejection of truth more serious than typical childhood rebellion. I watched as ministry children were being evaluated according to their response to extraordinary privileges, and the vast majority were failing to demonstrate the reverence and responsiveness that their spiritual advantages required. But what God revealed about the emotional impact on parents during the rapture was so heartbreaking that it made me understand the urgency of this message. Look at what happens to Christian parents during the rapture when they discover their children's actual spiritual condition, God instructed. I watched as the rapture occurred and Christian parents who had assumed their children were safe experienced the devastating shock of being separated from unprepared children. Parents who had false confidence in their children's spiritual condition, God explained, experience the most traumatic aspect of the rapture as they discover their assumptions were wrong and their children are not ready for inclusion. I saw believing parents being raptured while their children were left behind, creating scenes of family separation that were more heartbreaking than any earthly tragedy. These parents, God continued, had focused on external Christian factors rather than their children's actual heart condition and personal spiritual development, leaving their children unprepared despite Christian family environments. I watched as parents who had provided Christian homes, church attendance, and moral instruction discovered that these external factors had not created the internal spiritual reality necessary for rapture inclusion. But then God began to reveal the most crucial information of all: what parents could do immediately to assess and prepare their children for rapture readiness. Look at the assessment and preparation process that can transform these statistics, God instructed. I watched as God revealed specific steps that parents could take immediately to evaluate their children's spiritual condition and ensure proper preparation for rapture inclusion. But what He showed me about the assessment criteria and preparation methods was so detailed and practical that it will help every parent determine their children's current spiritual state and take immediate action to ensure their readiness. And honestly, what God revealed about the time frame for effective preparation will either bring relief to parents who start immediately or create urgent concern for those who delay this crucial spiritual work. But before I can share those specific assessment and preparation steps, I need to show you what God revealed about the most important discovery of all: the exact spiritual experiences that children need to be rapture ready, and how parents can guide their children into these essential encounters with Christ. The late afternoon sun is casting long shadows across my prayer room now, and honestly, the weight of what God is revealing about the specific spiritual experiences children need for rapture readiness feels like the most crucial parenting information ever disclosed. The pages scattered across my desk contain detailed instructions about the exact spiritual encounters that can transform unprepared children into rapture-ready believers, ESE, information so specific and practical that it will revolutionize how Christian parents approach their children's spiritual development. And that's exactly what God wanted me to grasp in this vital phase of the revelation. That there are specific, measurable spiritual experiences that children must have to qualify for rapture, inclusion, and parents can guide their children into these essential encounters immediately. Now, I will reveal the essential spiritual experiences that prepare children for rapture inclusion, God said with urgency, that made every word feel like a divine rescue plan for unprepared children. Because, Jonathan, most Christian parents don't understand what specific spiritual encounters their children need, and without these precise experiences, even children in Christian families will be left behind during the rapture. You know what happened next? God began unveiling the most detailed and practical spiritual preparation guide for children that has ever been revealed. Specific experiences that could transform the shocking statistics I had just witnessed and ensure that children in Christian families were genuinely ready for rapture evaluation. I mean, this wasn't about general spiritual instruction or hoping children would gradually develop faith, but about precise spiritual encounters that created measurable transformation and guaranteed rapture readiness. Look at the essential spiritual experiences for Category 2 children, God instructed. I watched as God revealed the specific encounters that Category 2 children needed to qualify for rapture inclusion. Category 2. Children must experience genuine heart transformation that demonstrates love for me and others, God explained, which requires specific spiritual encounters that create internal change rather than external compliance. I saw that Category 2 children needed more than moral instruction. They needed actual spiritual experiences that transformed their hearts and created genuine love for God and others. The first essential experience for Category 2 children, God continued, is a personal encounter with my love that creates genuine affection for spiritual reality rather than mere obedience to parental expectations. I watched as God showed me how parents could guide their young children into personal experiences of God's love that transformed their hearts from the inside out. This encounter, God explained, occurs when parents help their children experience my presence during prayer, worship, or spiritual instruction in ways that create genuine emotional connection to spiritual reality. I saw parents praying with their Category 2 children and helping them recognize when God's presence was touching their hearts, creating personal experiences of divine love that went beyond intellectual understanding. Look at how this encounter transforms Category 2 children, God instructed. I watched as children who had experienced genuine encounters with God's love began demonstrating spontaneous kindness, natural generosity, and authentic concern for others that came from internal transformation rather than external pressure. Children who have experienced my love, God explained, begin choosing kindness because they want to please me, not because they fear punishment or seek rewards. I saw Category 2 children whose hearts had been touched by God's love naturally sharing toys, comforting crying siblings, and showing compassion to animals because their hearts had been transformed by divine encounter. The second essential experience for Category 2 children, God continued, is learning to recognize and respond to my voice during age-appropriate spiritual communication. I watched as God revealed how parents could teach their young children to hear God's voice and respond to simple spiritual promptings appropriate to their developmental level. Category 2 children, God explained, must learn to distinguish between their own thoughts and my gentle promptings about kindness, obedience, and love. I saw parents teaching their children to pause and listen for God's voice when facing simple moral choices, helping them recognize divine guidance and respond appropriately. Look at how this experience develops in Category 2 children, God instructed. I watched as children learned to recognize God's gentle promptings to share, help, obey, or show kindness, and their consistent response to these promptings demonstrated hearts that were responsive to divine guidance. Children who learn to hear and obey my voice, God explained, develop spiritual sensitivity that qualifies them for rapture inclusion because they have demonstrated responsiveness to divine communication. I saw Category 2 children who had learned to recognize and respond to God's voice, consistently making choices that reflected divine guidance rather than selfish impulses. The third essential experience for Category 2 children, God continued, is developing genuine prayer communication that demonstrates personal relationship rather than recited formulas. I watched as God showed me how parents could help their young children transition from memorized prayers to personal communication with God that reflected genuine relationship. Category 2 children, God explained, must learn to talk to me about their feelings, needs, and experiences in ways that demonstrate they understand I am a real person who cares about their lives. I saw parents encouraging their children to tell God about their day, ask for help with problems, and express gratitude for specific blessings in their own words rather than reciting memorized prayers. Look at how genuine prayer develops in Category 2 children, God instructed. I watched as children began spontaneously talking to God throughout the day, asking for help with difficulties, thanking Him for good things, and sharing their feelings in natural conversation that demonstrated real relationship. Children who develop genuine prayer communication, God explained, demonstrate personal relationship with me that qualifies them for rapture inclusion because they have moved beyond religious ritual to authentic spiritual connection. But then God revealed the essential experiences for Category 3 children, and what He showed me was dramatically different and more intensive. Look at the essential spiritual experiences for Category 3 children, God instructed. I watched as God revealed that Category 3 children needed completely different spiritual encounters that reflected their capacity for adult-level spiritual understanding and personal salvation decisions. Category 3 children must experience personal conviction of sin and conscious salvation decisions, God explained, because they have reached the capacity for individual spiritual accountability and cannot rely on family, faith, or moral behavior. I saw that Category 3 children needed genuine conversion experiences that included recognition of personal sin, understanding of Christ's sacrifice, and conscious decisions to accept salvation. The first essential experience for Category 3 children, God continued, is personal conviction of sin that creates genuine recognition of their need for salvation rather than assumption that they are automatically saved through family faith. I watched as God showed me how parents could help their children recognize their personal sinfulness and need for individual salvation without creating condemnation or fear. This conviction, God explained, must be genuine spiritual awareness of personal wrongdoing and separation from me, not just intellectual understanding of theological concepts. I saw parents helping their Category 3 children recognize specific sins they had committed and understand how these sins separated them from God, creating genuine spiritual conviction rather than mere moral awareness. Look at how genuine conviction develops in Category 3 children, God instructed. I watched as children experienced real sorrow for specific sins they had committed, understanding that their wrongdoing had hurt God and created separation that required forgiveness. Children who experienced genuine conviction, God explained, recognize their personal need for salvation and become ready for authentic conversion experiences rather than assuming they are automatically saved. I saw Category 3 children who had experienced genuine conviction of sin desperately wanting forgiveness and salvation rather than assuming their Christian family background made them automatically safe. The second essential experience for Category 3 children, God continued, is conscious acceptance of Christ as personal Savior through individual prayer and commitment that reflects genuine understanding and personal choice. I watched as God revealed how parents could guide their children through authentic salvation experiences that included personal prayer, conscious commitment, and genuine spiritual transformation. This salvation experience, God explained, must be the child's individual choice based on their personal conviction and understanding, not compliance with parental expectations or family traditions. I saw parents helping their Category 3 children pray personal salvation prayers that reflected genuine repentance, conscious faith, and individual commitment to Christ as their personal Savior. Look at how genuine salvation transforms Category 3 children, God instructed. I watched as children who had experienced authentic conversion began demonstrating spontaneous spiritual hunger, natural desire for prayer and Bible reading, and genuine concern for others' salvation that came from internal transformation. Children who have experienced genuine salvation, God explained, develop personal relationships with me that are independent of their family's faith and demonstrate individual spiritual life. I saw Category 3 children who had been genuinely saved beginning to pray on their own, ask spiritual questions, and show concern for unsaved friends because their hearts had been transformed by personal encounter with Christ. The third essential experience for Category 3 children, God continued, is developing personal spiritual disciplines that demonstrate individual spiritual life rather than dependence on family spiritual environment. I watched as God showed me how parents could help their children develop age-appropriate personal spiritual practices that reflected genuine individual relationship with Christ. Category 3 children, God explained, must demonstrate personal spiritual initiative through individual prayer, Bible reading, and spiritual choices that reflect their own relationship with me. I saw parents encouraging their children to develop personal quiet times, individual prayer habits, and spiritual practices that they maintained because of their own spiritual hunger rather than parental requirements. But then God revealed the essential experiences for Category 4 children, and what He showed me was so intensive it reflected their extraordinary spiritual privileges and heightened accountability. Look at the essential spiritual experiences for Category 4 children, God instructed. I watched as God revealed that Category 4 children needed the most intensive spiritual preparation because their extraordinary privileges created the highest level of accountability. Category 4 children must demonstrate reverence for supernatural realities and appropriate response to extraordinary spiritual privileges, God explained, because their exposure to divine encounters creates accountability that exceeds normal childhood spiritual requirements. I saw that Category 4 children needed to demonstrate mature spiritual responses to the supernatural encounters and prophetic revelations they had been exposed to through their privileged environments. The first essential experience for Category 4 children, God continued, is developing genuine reverence for supernatural manifestations and prophetic revelations rather than treating extraordinary spiritual realities as commonplace or entertaining. I watched as God showed me how parents could help their Category 4 children understand the significance of the supernatural encounters they had witnessed and respond with appropriate awe and worship. This reverence, God explained, must be genuine spiritual recognition of divine reality that creates worship and hunger for more spiritual truth rather than indifference or entertainment. I saw parents helping their Category 4 children understand that the healings, prophetic words, and supernatural encounters they had witnessed were extraordinary privileges that required reverent response and spiritual hunger. Look at how genuine reverence develops in Category 4 children, God instructed. I watched as Category 4 children who had developed appropriate reverence began responding to supernatural encounters with worship, asking spiritual questions, and seeking deeper understanding of divine reality. Children who develop genuine reverence, God explained, demonstrate hearts that value spiritual privilege and seek deeper relationship with me rather than taking extraordinary encounters for granted. I saw Category 4 children who had learned to reverence supernatural realities, becoming spiritually hungry for more encounters with God and demonstrating mature spiritual responses despite their young age. The second essential experience for Category 4 children, God continued, is personal response to specific prophetic words or spiritual encounters they have received, demonstrating obedience to direct divine communication. I watched as God revealed how parents could help their Category 4 children understand and respond appropriately to personal prophetic words or spiritual encounters they had experienced. This response, God explained, must be conscious obedience to specific divine communication the child has received, demonstrating they understand they have been given direct access to my voice. I saw parents helping their Category 4 children remember and obey specific prophetic words they had received, understand the significance of personal spiritual encounters, and respond with appropriate lifestyle changes. Look at how appropriate response develops in Category 4 children, God instructed. I watched as Category 4 children began taking personal prophetic words seriously, making lifestyle changes based on spiritual encounters, and demonstrating mature spiritual responses to direct divine communication. Children who respond appropriately to direct divine communication, God explained, demonstrate spiritual maturity that qualifies them for rapture inclusion despite their young age, because they have proven their hearts are responsive to extraordinary privilege. But what God revealed about the timing and process for guiding children through these essential experiences was so specific that it will help every parent create immediate transformation in their children's spiritual condition. Look at how parents can guide their children through these essential experiences immediately, God instructed. I watched as God revealed step-by-step processes that parents could use to help their children experience the spiritual encounters necessary for rapture readiness. For Category 2 children, God explained, parents should create daily opportunities for spiritual encounter through interactive prayer, worship, and spiritual instruction that helps children experience my presence personally. I saw parents setting aside specific times each day to pray with their young children in ways that help them recognize God's presence, feel His love, and experience genuine spiritual connection. These encounters, God continued, should be interactive experiences where children learn to recognize my presence, hear my voice, and respond to my love, rather than passive reception of spiritual instruction. I watched as parents helped their Category 2 children recognize when God was speaking to their hearts, feel His presence during prayer, and experience His love in ways that created genuine spiritual transformation. For Category 3 children, God explained, parents should create opportunities for personal conviction and salvation through honest spiritual conversations, individual prayer times, and guidance into personal relationship with Christ. I saw parents having serious spiritual conversations with their school-age children about sin, salvation, and personal relationship with Christ, helping them recognize their need for individual salvation experiences. These conversations, God continued, should lead to personal salvation prayers and conscious commitment decisions that reflect the child's individual choice rather than compliance with family expectations. I watched as parents guided their Category 3 children through authentic conversion experiences that included personal conviction, conscious salvation prayers, and genuine spiritual transformation. For Category 4 children, God explained, parents should help them understand the significance of their spiritual privileges and guide them into appropriate responses to the extraordinary encounters they have experienced. I saw parents having intensive spiritual conversations with their Category 4 children about the prophetic words, supernatural encounters, and spiritual privileges they had received, helping them understand the accountability this created. But what God revealed about the time frame for these essential experiences was so urgent that it created immediate pressure for parents to begin this process. These essential spiritual experiences, God said, must be completed immediately because the rapture could occur at any moment, and children who have not had these encounters will not be ready for inclusion, regardless of their family's spiritual condition. I watched as God revealed that there was no guarantee of time for gradual spiritual development, making immediate intensive spiritual preparation essential for every unprepared child. Parents who delay this spiritual preparation, God explained, risk being separated from their children during the rapture if these essential experiences are not completed before the event occurs. But then God began to reveal the most practical information of all, the specific assessment tools that parents could use to determine whether their children had successfully completed these essential spiritual experiences and were genuinely ready for rapture inclusion. Look at the assessment criteria that confirm children have completed their essential spiritual experiences, God instructed. I watched as God revealed measurable indicators that parents could observe to confirm their children's rapture readiness. But what he showed me about these assessment tools was so specific and practical that it will help every parent determine with certainty whether their children are genuinely prepared or need additional spiritual preparation. And honestly, what God revealed about the final preparation steps will either confirm that your children are ready for the rapture or reveal exactly what spiritual work remains to be completed before this momentous event occurs. The evening shadows are deepening in my prayer room now, and honestly, the intensity of what God is revealing about the specific assessment tools for determining children's rapture readiness feels like the most critical parenting information ever disclosed. The pages before me contain detailed evaluation criteria so precise that parents will be able to determine with absolute certainty whether their children are genuinely prepared for rapture, inclusion, or desperately need additional spiritual preparation. And that's exactly what God wanted me to understand in this final phase of the revelation, hence that there are measurable, observable indicators that confirm children's spiritual readiness, and parents must use these assessment tools immediately to ensure their children's eternal security. Now I will reveal the assessment tools that will confirm your children's rapture readiness, God said with finality that made every word feel like a divine checklist for eternal security. Because, Jonathan, most Christian parents cannot accurately assess their children's spiritual condition, and without these precise evaluation criteria, they will have false confidence in unprepared children or unnecessary anxiety about children who are genuinely ready. You know what happened next? God began unveiling the most detailed spiritual assessment system for children that has ever been revealed, specific, measurable indicators that would eliminate all guesswork about children's rapture readiness and provide parents with absolute certainty about their children's spiritual condition. I mean, this wasn't about hoping children were ready or assuming family faith was sufficient, but about observable evidence that confirmed genuine spiritual transformation and guaranteed rapture inclusion. Look at the assessment tools for Category 2 children, God instructed. I watched as God revealed specific indicators that parents could observe to confirm their young children had experienced the essential spiritual encounters necessary for rapture readiness. The first assessment indicator for Category 2 children, God explained, is spontaneous demonstration of supernatural love and kindness that exceeds normal childhood behavior and reflects genuine heart transformation. I saw parents observing their young children to determine whether they were demonstrating love and kindness that came from internal spiritual transformation rather than external pressure or training. This indicator, God continued, is evidenced when children consistently choose kindness over selfishness, generosity over greed, and compassion over cruelty, without parental prompting or reward systems. I watched as parents assessed whether their Category 2 children were naturally sharing toys with siblings, comforting crying friends, showing gentleness to animals, and demonstrating love that reflected genuine spiritual transformation. Look at the specific behaviors that confirm this indicator, God instructed. I watched as God revealed precise behaviors that indicated genuine spiritual transformation in Category 2 children. Children who have experienced genuine heart transformation, God explained, will spontaneously share their favorite possessions, comfort others who are hurt or sad, show kindness to those who have been unkind to them, and demonstrate love that reflects my character. I saw Category 2 children who had been genuinely transformed by encounters with God's love, naturally giving away treasured toys to sad friends, hugging siblings who had been mean to them, and showing compassion that exceeded normal childhood capacity. These behaviors, God continued, must be consistent patterns rather than occasional good choices, and they must occur without parental prompting or reward systems. I watched as parents learned to distinguish between children who had been trained to behave kindly and children whose hearts had been transformed to naturally choose love. The second assessment indicator for Category 2 children, God explained, is genuine recognition of and response to my voice during age-appropriate spiritual communication. I saw parents testing whether their young children could actually hear God's voice and respond appropriately to simple spiritual promptings. This indicator, God continued, is evidenced when children can distinguish between their own thoughts and my gentle promptings about kindness, obedience, and love, and consistently respond to divine guidance. I watched as parents created situations where their Category 2 children needed to choose between selfish desires and loving actions, observing whether the children recognized and responded to God's promptings toward love. Look at how to test this indicator, God instructed. I watched as God revealed specific ways parents could assess their children's ability to hear and respond to His voice. Parents should create moments of choice, God explained, where children must decide between selfish and loving actions. Then observe whether the children pause to listen for my guidance and choose to obey my promptings toward love. I saw parents presenting their Category 2 children with opportunities to share, help, or show kindness, then watching to see if the children demonstrated awareness of God's voice, guiding them toward loving choices. Children who have learned to hear my voice, God continued, will pause before making choices, demonstrate awareness that I am guiding them, and consistently choose loving actions because they recognize my promptings. I watched as Category 2 children who had genuine spiritual sensitivity would stop and listen for God's guidance when facing moral choices, then choose kindness because they recognize divine prompting. The third assessment indicator for Category 2 children, God explained, is natural, spontaneous prayer communication that demonstrates genuine personal relationship rather than recited formulas or parental compliance. I saw parents observing whether their young children were developing authentic prayer relationships that reflected genuine spiritual connection rather than religious training. This indicator, God continued, is evidenced when children spontaneously talk to me throughout the day about their experiences, feelings, and needs in natural conversation that demonstrates they understand I am real and personally involved in their lives. I watched as parents assessed whether their Category 2 children were naturally talking to God about their problems, thanking Him for good things, and sharing their feelings in spontaneous prayer that reflected genuine relationship. But then God revealed the assessment tools for Category 3 children, and what He showed me was dramatically more intensive and specific. Look at the assessment tools for Category 3 children, God instructed. I watched as God revealed that Category 3 children required completely different assessment criteria that reflected their capacity for adult-level spiritual understanding and personal salvation experiences. The first assessment indicator for Category 3 children, God explained, is genuine conviction of personal sin that creates authentic recognition of their need for individual salvation rather than assumption of automatic spiritual safety through family faith. I saw parents assessing whether their school-age children had experienced real spiritual conviction about their personal sinfulness and understood their individual need for salvation. This indicator, God continued, is evidenced when children can identify specific sins they have committed, understand how these sins separate them from me, and demonstrate genuine sorrow for their wrongdoing rather than mere intellectual acknowledgement of theological concepts. I watched as parents tested whether their Category 3 children could name specific sins they had committed, explain why these sins were wrong, and demonstrate genuine remorse that reflected spiritual conviction rather than fear of punishment. Look at how to assess genuine conviction, God instructed. I watched as God revealed specific ways parents could determine whether their children had experienced authentic spiritual conviction. Parents should ask their children to identify specific sins they have committed, God explained, and observe whether the children demonstrate genuine sorrow for wrongdoing and understanding of how sin separates them from me. I saw parents having serious conversations with their Category 3 children about specific lies they had told, times they had been cruel to siblings, or moments they had disobeyed, assessing whether the children showed genuine spiritual conviction about these sins. Children who have experienced genuine conviction, God continued, will demonstrate real sorrow for specific wrongdoing, understand that their sins hurt me personally, and recognize their desperate need for forgiveness and salvation. I watched as Category 3 children who had experienced authentic conviction would become genuinely upset when discussing their sins, understanding that their wrongdoing had hurt God and created separation that required salvation. The second assessment indicator for Category 3 children, God explained, is conscious, personal salvation experience that reflects individual choice and genuine spiritual transformation rather than compliance with family expectations. I saw parents assessing whether their children had experienced authentic conversion that included personal prayer, conscious commitment, and genuine spiritual transformation. This indicator, God continued, is evidenced when children can describe their personal salvation experience, explain why they chose to accept Christ, and demonstrate spiritual transformation that reflects genuine conversion. I watched as parents tested whether their Category 3 children could explain their salvation experience in their own words, describe why they had chosen to accept Christ, and demonstrate spiritual changes that reflected genuine conversion. Look at how to assess genuine salvation, God instructed. I watched as God revealed specific ways parents could confirm their children's authentic conversion experiences. Parents should ask their children to describe their salvation experience, God explained, and observe whether the children can explain their personal choice to accept Christ, describe their salvation prayer, and demonstrate spiritual transformation that reflects genuine conversion. I saw parents having detailed conversations with their Category 3 children about when and why they had accepted Christ, assessing whether the children could describe personal salvation experiences that reflected individual choice rather than family pressure. Children who have experienced genuine salvation, God continued, will be able to describe their personal salvation prayer, explain why they chose to accept Christ, and demonstrate spiritual hunger and transformation that reflects authentic conversion. I watched as Category 3 children who had been genuinely saved could describe specific moments when they had prayed to accept Christ, explain their personal reasons for choosing salvation, and demonstrate spiritual changes that confirmed authentic conversion. The third assessment indicator for Category 3 children, God explained, is development of personal spiritual disciplines that demonstrate individual spiritual life, independent of family spiritual environment. I saw parents assessing whether their children were developing personal spiritual practices that reflected genuine individual relationship with Christ rather than dependence on family faith. This indicator, God continued, is evidenced when children demonstrate personal spiritual initiative through individual prayer, Bible reading, and spiritual choices that reflect their own relationship with me rather than parental requirements. I watched as parents observed whether their Category 3 children were naturally seeking personal prayer time, showing interest in Bible reading, and making spiritual choices that reflected individual spiritual life. But then God revealed the assessment tools for Category 4 children, and what He showed me was so intensive it reflected their extraordinary accountability. Look at the assessment tools for Category 4 children, God instructed. I watched as God revealed that Category 4 children required the most rigorous assessment because their extraordinary privileges created the highest level of accountability. The first assessment indicator for Category 4 children, God explained, is genuine reverence for supernatural manifestations and prophetic revelations that demonstrates appropriate spiritual response to extraordinary privileges. I saw parents assessing whether their Category 4 children were responding to supernatural encounters with appropriate awe, worship, and spiritual hunger rather than indifference or entertainment. This indicator, God continued, is evidenced when children demonstrate genuine worship and spiritual hunger in response to supernatural encounters, ask serious spiritual questions about prophetic revelations, and show reverent respect for extraordinary spiritual realities. I watched as parents observed whether their Category 4 children responded to healings, prophetic words, and supernatural encounters with worship and spiritual hunger rather than treating these extraordinary experiences as commonplace entertainment. Look at how to assess genuine reverence, God instructed. I watched as God revealed specific ways parents could determine whether their children were responding appropriately to extraordinary spiritual privileges. Parents should observe their children's responses to supernatural encounters, God explained, and assess whether the children demonstrate worship, ask serious spiritual questions, and show reverent hunger for more spiritual truth. I saw parents watching their Category 4 children during and after supernatural encounters, assessing whether the children responded with appropriate awe and spiritual hunger, or with indifference and irreverence. Children who have developed genuine reverence, God continued, will respond to supernatural encounters with worship, seek to understand prophetic revelations, and demonstrate spiritual hunger that reflects appreciation for extraordinary privilege. I watched as Category 4 children who had appropriate reverence would worship during supernatural encounters, ask serious questions about prophetic words, and demonstrate spiritual hunger that showed they valued their extraordinary privileges. The second assessment indicator for Category 4 children, God explained, is personal obedience to specific prophetic words or spiritual encounters they have received, demonstrating appropriate response to direct divine communication. I saw parents assessing whether their Category 4 children were taking personal prophetic words seriously and making lifestyle changes based on direct divine communication they had received. This indicator, God continued, is evidenced when children can remember specific prophetic words they have received, understand the significance of personal spiritual encounters, and demonstrate obedience through lifestyle changes that reflect response to direct divine communication. I watched as parents tested whether their Category 4 children could recall personal prophetic words, explain what these words meant, and demonstrate obedience through specific changes in behavior or attitude. But what God revealed about the final preparation steps was so urgent and specific that it created immediate action items for every parent. Look at the final preparation steps for children who fail assessment indicators, God instructed. I watched as God revealed specific actions parents could take immediately to prepare children who were not yet ready for rapture inclusion. For Category 2, children who fail assessment indicators, God explained, parents must create intensive daily spiritual encounters that help children experience my love, hear my voice, and develop genuine prayer relationships. I saw parents implementing daily spiritual practices specifically designed to help their young children experience the essential spiritual encounters necessary for Category 2 readiness. These encounters, God continued, must be interactive experiences where children learn to recognize my presence, respond to my love, and develop genuine spiritual sensitivity rather than religious compliance. I watched as parents created specific times each day for helping their Category 2 children experience God's presence, recognize His voice, and develop authentic spiritual relationships. For Category 3 children who fail assessment indicators, God explained, parents must guide them through intensive conviction and salvation experiences that create genuine conversion rather than assumed spiritual safety. I saw parents having serious spiritual conversations with their school-age children about sin, salvation, and personal relationship with Christ, guiding them through authentic conversion experiences. These experiences, God continued, must include genuine conviction of personal sin, conscious salvation prayers, and observable spiritual transformation that confirms authentic conversion. I watched as parents helped their Category 3 children recognize their personal sinfulness, experience genuine conviction, and make conscious salvation decisions that created observable spiritual transformation. For Category 4 children who fail assessment indicators, God explained, parents must help them understand the significance of their spiritual privileges and guide them into appropriate responses to extraordinary encounters they have experienced. I saw parents having intensive conversations with their Category 4 children about the prophetic words, supernatural encounters, and spiritual privileges they had received, helping them develop appropriate reverence and obedience. But what God revealed about the time frame for final preparation was so urgent that it created immediate pressure for parents to begin this process. This final preparation, God said, must be completed immediately because the rapture could occur at any moment, and children who have not successfully completed their essential spiritual experiences will not be ready for inclusion. I watched as God revealed that there was no guarantee of additional time for spiritual preparation, making immediate intensive work essential for every unprepared child. Parents who delay this final preparation, God explained, risk eternal separation from their children if the rapture occurs before the necessary spiritual work is completed. But then God revealed the most sobering truth of all. What would happen to unprepared children who were left behind? Look at the destiny of unprepared children who miss the rapture, God instructed. I watched as God revealed the specific challenges that unprepared children would face during the tribulation period, and what I saw was both terrifying and hopeful. Children who are left behind, God explained, will face the most intense spiritual warfare in human history, but they will also have opportunities for salvation that could result in eternal life if they respond appropriately to tribulation circumstances. I saw unprepared children experiencing the trauma of family separation, the chaos of global collapse, and the intensity of supernatural judgment, but also receiving clear spiritual choices that could result in salvation. However, God continued with solemnity that made the spiritual atmosphere heavy with eternal weight. The tribulation will be far more difficult for children than the current age of grace, and many who could easily be saved now will struggle to maintain faith under tribulation pressure. I watched as children who could have been easily prepared for the rapture faced far more difficult spiritual challenges during the tribulation, with many failing to maintain faith under intense persecution and supernatural deception. And honestly, what God showed me about the eternal consequences of parental delay in spiritual preparation was so sobering that it will motivate every parent to begin immediate, intensive spiritual work with their children. But the revelation isn't complete yet. God has one final section to share, the most urgent call to action that will determine whether Christian families are reunited in heaven or tragically separated for eternity. The darkness has settled completely over my prayer room now, and honestly, the weight of what God is revealing in this final phase feels like the most urgent parental mandate ever issued from heaven. The pages scattered across my desk contain a divine call to action so immediate and critical that it will determine whether Christian families are reunited in glory or tragically separated for eternity. And that's exactly what God wanted me to grasp in this concluding revelation, NUIZ, that every moment of delay in preparing children for the rapture increases the risk of eternal family separation, and parents must act immediately with the spiritual tools He has provided. Now I will issue the urgent call to action that will determine the eternal destiny of children in Christian families, God said with intensity that made every word feel like a divine alarm about the approaching rapture. Because, Jonathan, the time for gradual spiritual development has ended, and parents must implement immediate intensive preparation or risk losing their children to the tribulation period and its devastating spiritual challenges. You know what happened next? God began unveiling the most urgent and specific action plan for parents that has ever been revealed, immediate steps that could transform unprepared children into rapture-ready believers within days or weeks rather than months or years. This wasn't about hoping for future opportunities or assuming there was time for gradual spiritual growth, but about emergency spiritual preparation that could ensure children's eternal security before the rapture occurred. Look at the immediate action plan for parents with unprepared children, God instructed. I watched as God revealed a step-by-step emergency preparation process that parents could begin implementing within hours of receiving this revelation. Parents must begin intensive spiritual assessment of every child immediately, God explained, using the evaluation criteria I have revealed to determine each child's current spiritual condition and specific preparation needs. I saw parents sitting down with each of their children individually to conduct thorough spiritual assessments using the specific indicators God had revealed for each category. This assessment, God continued, must be completed within 24 hours of receiving this revelation, because every day of delay increases the risk that the rapture will occur before preparation is completed. I watched as parents urgently evaluated their children's spiritual condition, using the precise assessment tools to determine which children were genuinely prepared and which needed immediate intensive spiritual work. Look at the specific assessment process parents must implement immediately, God instructed. I watched as God revealed the exact steps parents should take to evaluate their children's rapture readiness. For each child, God explained, parents must determine the child's spiritual category based on age, exposure, and accountability level. Then assess whether the child has completed the essential spiritual experiences required for that category. I saw parents carefully evaluating each child to determine whether they were category 2, 3, or 4, then using the appropriate assessment indicators to evaluate their spiritual readiness. Parents must ask specific questions, God continued, observe specific behaviors, and test specific spiritual responses to determine with certainty whether each child is genuinely prepared or desperately needs additional spiritual work. I watched as parents conducted detailed spiritual interviews with their children, asking about their salvation experiences, observing their spiritual behaviors, and testing their responses to spiritual guidance. Look at the emergency preparation process for unprepared children, God instructed. I watched as God revealed intensive spiritual preparation methods that could transform unprepared children within days rather than months. For Category 2, children who fail assessment, God explained, parents must create multiple daily spiritual encounters that help children experience my love, hear my voice, and develop genuine prayer relationships through intensive, interactive spiritual experiences. I saw parents implementing emergency spiritual preparation for their young children that included multiple prayer times each day, intensive spiritual instruction, and concentrated efforts to help children experience God's presence personally. These encounters, God continued, must be designed to create genuine spiritual transformation within days through concentrated exposure to my presence and intensive guidance into essential spiritual experiences. I watched as parents created spiritual environments so intensive that their Category 2 children experienced rapid spiritual transformation through concentrated encounters with God's love and presence. For Category 3 children who fail assessment, God explained, parents must guide them through intensive conviction and salvation experiences that create genuine conversion within days through concentrated spiritual instruction and individual spiritual encounters. I saw parents having multiple serious spiritual conversations each day with their school-aged children, helping them recognize their sinfulness, experience genuine conviction, and make authentic salvation decisions. These experiences, God continued, must include daily spiritual instruction about sin and salvation, intensive prayer times for conviction and conversion, and immediate guidance into personal spiritual disciplines that confirm genuine transformation. I watched as parents implemented emergency spiritual preparation that helped their Category 3 children experience genuine conviction and authentic salvation within days through intensive spiritual encounters. For Category 4 children who fail assessment, God explained, parents must help them understand the significance of their spiritual privileges and guide them into appropriate responses through intensive spiritual instruction about their extraordinary accountability. I saw parents having multiple daily conversations with their Category 4 children about the prophetic words, supernatural encounters, and spiritual privileges they had received, helping them develop appropriate reverence and obedience. But what God revealed about the time frame for this emergency preparation was so urgent that it created immediate pressure for parents to begin this process within hours. This emergency spiritual preparation, God said, must be completed within 30 days because the rapture is imminent, and children who have not completed their essential spiritual experiences by that time may not have additional opportunities before the event occurs. I watched as God revealed that parents had an extremely limited window of time to ensure their children's spiritual readiness, making immediate, intensive action essential. Parents who delay this emergency preparation even for days, God explained, risk eternal separation from their children if the rapture occurs before the necessary spiritual work is completed. I saw the devastating consequences of parental delay, of satire, families separated for eternity because parents had postponed urgent spiritual preparation for their unprepared children. But then God revealed something about the spiritual opposition parents would face during this emergency preparation that was both sobering and encouraging. Look at the spiritual warfare that will intensify during emergency preparation, God instructed. I watched as God revealed that Satan would launch intensive attacks against families attempting to prepare their children for the rapture. The enemy, God explained, will create distractions, emergencies, conflicts, and obstacles designed to prevent parents from completing the spiritual preparation their children need for rapture readiness. I saw families experiencing unusual crises, unexpected conflicts, and intense distractions that seemed designed to prevent them from focusing on their children's spiritual preparation. These attacks, God continued, will include family conflicts, work emergencies, health crises, and spiritual opposition specifically designed to delay or prevent the spiritual work that could save children from tribulation separation. I watched as parents attempting to prepare their children for the rapture faced intense spiritual warfare that created obstacles to the urgent spiritual work their children needed. However, God said with authority that made the spiritual atmosphere shift. Parents who persist in emergency spiritual preparation despite opposition will receive supernatural assistance that accelerates their children's spiritual transformation beyond natural possibilities. I watched as parents who continued intensive spiritual preparation despite obstacles experienced miraculous breakthroughs in their children's spiritual condition that exceeded normal spiritual development patterns. Look at the supernatural assistance available during emergency preparation, God instructed. I watched as God revealed extraordinary spiritual help that would be available to parents implementing urgent spiritual preparation for their children. Parents who commit to intensive spiritual preparation, God explained, will receive supernatural wisdom, divine encounters, and miraculous spiritual breakthroughs that can transform unprepared children within days rather than months. I saw parents experiencing unusual spiritual insight about their children's needs, supernatural encounters that accelerated their children's spiritual development, and miraculous transformations that confirmed divine assistance. This supernatural assistance, God continued, includes direct divine intervention in children's hearts, accelerated spiritual understanding, and miraculous spiritual experiences that create rapid transformation in response to parents' urgent spiritual work. I watched as children whose parents implemented emergency spiritual preparation experienced supernatural encounters, accelerated spiritual growth, and miraculous transformations that confirmed God's direct intervention in response to parental urgency. But what God revealed about the specific prayer strategies parents should implement was so powerful that it could transform their children's spiritual condition within hours. Look at the emergency prayer strategies that accelerate children's spiritual transformation, God instructed. I watched as God revealed specific prayer methods that could create rapid spiritual breakthroughs in unprepared children. Parents must implement intensive intercession for their children's spiritual condition, God explained, including specific prayers for conviction, salvation, and spiritual transformation that invite my direct intervention in their children's hearts. I saw parents praying with unprecedented intensity for their children's spiritual condition, using specific prayers that invited God's direct intervention in their children's hearts and minds. These prayers, God continued, must include specific requests for spiritual conviction, divine encounters, and supernatural transformation that can create rapid spiritual change in response to urgent parental intercession. I watched as parents prayed specifically for their children to experience conviction of sin, encounter God's presence personally, and receive supernatural spiritual transformation that would prepare them for rapture inclusion. Look at the specific prayers that create rapid spiritual transformation, God instructed. I watched as God revealed exact prayer language that parents could use to accelerate their children's spiritual preparation. Parents should pray, Father, create genuine conviction of sin in my child's heart today. Help them recognize their personal need for salvation and experience authentic spiritual transformation. Give them supernatural encounters with your presence that create immediate spiritual readiness for the rapture, God explained. I saw parents using these specific prayers and experiencing immediate breakthroughs in their children's spiritual condition as God responded to urgent parental intercession. These prayers, God continued, must be prayed multiple times daily with faith that expects immediate divine response because of the urgency of rapture preparation. I watched as parents who prayed these specific prayers with expectant faith experienced rapid spiritual transformations in their children that confirmed God's immediate response to urgent intercession. But then God revealed the most sobering aspect of this urgent call to action. What would happen to parents who delayed or ignored this divine mandate? Look at the consequences for parents who delay emergency spiritual preparation, God instructed. I watched as God revealed the devastating results of parental delay in implementing urgent spiritual preparation for unprepared children. Parents who receive this revelation but delay emergency spiritual preparation, God explained, will bear responsibility for their children's spiritual condition if the rapture occurs before preparation is completed. I saw parents who had received clear instruction about their children's spiritual needs but had postponed urgent preparation, resulting in eternal separation when the rapture occurred before the necessary spiritual work was finished. These parents, God continued, will experience the most devastating aspect of the rapture as they are taken while their unprepared children are left behind, knowing they had opportunity to ensure their children's readiness, but failed to act with appropriate urgency. I watched as Christian parents experienced the unimaginable trauma of being raptured while their children were left behind, carrying the knowledge that they could have prevented this separation through immediate spiritual preparation. The regret and anguish, God explained, will be intensified by the understanding that their children's tribulation suffering could have been prevented through urgent spiritual action that they postponed or neglected. I saw parents in heaven experiencing ongoing anguish as they watched their children struggle through tribulation difficulties that could have been avoided through immediate spiritual preparation. But what God revealed about the hope available for parents who acted immediately was so encouraging that it provided motivation for urgent action. Look at the joy and relief for parents who complete emergency spiritual preparation, God instructed. I watched as God revealed the incredible blessing that awaited parents who successfully prepared their children for rapture inclusion. Parents who implement immediate intensive spiritual preparation, God explained, will experience the greatest joy possible as they are reunited with their children during the rapture, knowing they responded appropriately to divine warning and ensured their family's eternal unity. I saw families being raptured together because parents had acted immediately upon receiving revelation about their children's spiritual needs, creating scenes of family reunion that exceeded earthly joy. These parents, God continued, will experience eternal gratitude from their children who will understand throughout eternity that their parents' urgent spiritual action saved them from tribulation, suffering, and ensured their eternal salvation. I watched as children who had been prepared for the rapture through their parents' urgent action expressed eternal gratitude for parents who had responded immediately to divine warning about their spiritual condition. But then God revealed the final and most urgent aspect of this call to action, the specific commitment he was requiring from every parent who received this revelation. Look at the commitment I am requiring from every parent, God instructed. I watched as God revealed the specific response he expected from every parent who received this revelation about children's rapture readiness. Every parent who receives this revelation, God explained, must make an immediate commitment to implement emergency spiritual preparation for any unprepared children, regardless of the cost, inconvenience, or opposition they may face. I saw parents making conscious decisions to prioritize their children's spiritual preparation above all other activities, commitments, and concerns because of the eternal consequences involved. This commitment, God continued, must include willingness to rearrange schedules, cancel activities, and focus intensively on spiritual preparation until every child in the family has successfully completed their essential spiritual experiences. I watched as parents made radical adjustments to their priorities and schedules to ensure their children received the intensive spiritual preparation necessary for rapture readiness. Look at the specific commitment prayer I am requiring, God instructed. I watched as God revealed the exact commitment he wanted every parent to make in response to this revelation. Parents must pray, Father, I commit to implementing immediate emergency spiritual preparation for my children. I will assess their spiritual condition today, identify their specific needs, and provide intensive spiritual preparation until every child is genuinely ready for rapture inclusion. I will not delay, make excuses, or allow anything to prevent me from ensuring my children's eternal security, God explained. I saw parents making this specific commitment and experiencing immediate spiritual empowerment to begin the urgent work their children needed. This commitment, God continued, must be made immediately upon receiving this revelation because every hour of delay increases the risk that the rapture will occur before preparation is completed. But what God revealed in his final words was so urgent and final that it felt like the last warning before the rapture itself. Jonathan, God said with finality, that made the spiritual atmosphere heavy with eternal weight. This revelation about children's rapture readiness is the final warning I will give to Christian families before the rapture occurs. I watched as God revealed that this was the last opportunity for parents to receive specific instruction about preparing their children for the rapture. Parents who receive this revelation, God explained, are receiving their final opportunity to ensure their children's spiritual readiness before the event occurs, and family destinies are determined for eternity. I saw that this revelation represented the last chance for Christian families to address their children's spiritual preparation before the rapture separated prepared from unprepared family members. The rapture, God continued, will occur without additional warning, making immediate response to this revelation essential for every family that wants to be reunited in heaven rather than separated for eternity. And honestly, as I sit here in my prayer room with these pages of revelation spread before me, I understand that what God has revealed about children's rapture readiness will either motivate Christian parents to immediate urgent action or result in family separations that could have been prevented through proper spiritual preparation. The choice is now in the hands of every parent who receives this revelation. The spiritual tools have been provided, the assessment criteria have been revealed, the emergency preparation methods have been disclosed, the time frame has been established. What remains is the decision every Christian parent must make. Will they implement immediate, intensive spiritual preparation for their children, or will they risk eternal family separation by delaying the urgent spiritual work their children need for rapture readiness? The rapture is imminent. The revelation is complete. The choice is yours. But remember, every moment of delay increases the risk that the rapture will occur before your children are ready. And that's a risk no Christian parent should be willing to take when the tools for ensuring their children's spiritual readiness have been placed directly in their hands. The time for action is now. Your children's eternal destiny depends on what you do with this revelation in the next 24 hours. Don't delay, don't make excuses, don't assume you have time. Begin the emergency spiritual preparation your children need today. Their eternal security and your family's heavenly reunion depends on it.